Anyone who has been in a marriage knows that it is a difficult situation for the man and woman involved in the union. It all begins with the participants vowing to love each other until death, in sickness and in health, rejecting all others. These are powerful words and concepts that I don't think most people getting married fully understand, especially with all the surprises life throws at us. I certainly didn't fully understand them when I got married at the indecently young age of 18. I'm Amy Walton, née Allison. I always considered myself a pretty and quite smart girl, but nothing special. My self-image may have been distorted by the deplorable conditions of the home where I grew up, complicated by my parents' divorce. I always felt like it was my fault and my parents weren't insightful enough or simply didn't care enough to convince me otherwise. My brother grew up completely spoiled, and the fact that my mother began allowing overnight guests into the house after my father left only made the situation worse. Perhaps I married Brian Walton to get rid of control, contact, whatever you want to call it, from my mother. He was 20 years old when we got married, and he was as ignorant of life's matters as I was. We had a small, very small wedding, and we moved into a small apartment. I didn't have much sexual experience when I married Brian. I expected marital sex to be much better than it turned out to be, and perhaps with a more caring and responsive partner it would have been. Sometimes it wasn't bad, other times it was just Brian satisfying his needs. One of the problems that I always had with Brian, but never discussed before I said yes to "till death do us part, in sickness and in health, rejecting all others and other nonsense," was that he was a male chauvinist, especially in the company of other men. This did not mean that he was impolite to me or other women. On the contrary, he was. He just had strong, unrealistic, outdated ideas about women. Married life wasn't entirely bad, it just wasn't exciting or intellectually stimulating. Brian is a decent, gentle man, and even when we first got married, he was an excellent machine operator, which allowed him to earn decent money. I worked as a waitress for a while, and it was a job that I hated because I was constantly harassed. It seemed to me that many men found me much more attractive than I thought myself. I've never understood why if guys buy food and drinks at a restaurant, they think that gives them the right to hit on the waitress. I didn't play the game, so my tips were never great. 3 years after our wedding, our first child was born, a boy whom we named Tom. Brian insisted that I quit my job. I could take this in two ways: as a manifestation of his chauvinism or a real concern for the upbringing of our children. Since I hated being a waitress, I didn't care what exactly was the reason I quit. We had the usual ups and downs in our marriage, but it was all down when it came to caring for a child. I doubt Brian changed more than 5 diapers the entire time Tom needed them. After a miscarriage 2 years after Tom was born, I was deeply depressed. Brian didn't know how to deal with this. Finally, I went to a psychologist, and she helped me get back on my feet in spite of Brian, not because of him. Luckily, 18 months after the miscarriage, we gave birth to twin girls, whom we named Jamie and Brittany. Brian didn't provide any more help with them than he did with Tom until one day I lost my temper and forced him to take over all my responsibilities of caring for 2 babies and a 5-year-old at the same time. This made him reconsider his behavior, at least for a while, and he began to help a little. Don't get me wrong. Although Brian almost never helped with child care, he loved playing with them and spending time with them. It was obvious that they were the light of his life. Around the time the twins turned 6 months old, our financial situation changed dramatically for the better. Brian was initially promoted to master machinist because he was the only one in his factory who could accurately machine expensive and exotic materials such as beryllium copper. This meant that he made more than almost every other blue-collar worker in our Raleigh, North Carolina area. This, combined with being frugal with our money, allowed us to buy a nice home. The second event was that I invented a type of baby carrier that was stronger, simpler, and more aesthetically pleasing than anything on the market. Despite Brian's initial disdain, I went to a patent attorney, applied for a patent, and asked a friend of mine who was skilled with both a sewing machine and man's tools to make about a dozen carriers. I took them to the exhibition one weekend while Brian, with the help of his mother, looked after the children. My baby carriers were an instant hit. I sold the rights to a large company within 10 days of the show, and within 3 months, the royalties started coming in. Soon after that, I came up with another invention, which I patented. It was a new high-end crib model that could easily be converted into other pieces of furniture as the baby outgrew it. Although the money from my first invention was good, I thought I could make 10 times as much if I started making cribs myself. I found a local high-quality manufacturer whose business was in decline and someone with contacts in the baby department and stores. Using the royalty money, I started a business that quickly became successful. I realized that I have a talent for business. To lose the weight I had gained during my second pregnancy, I started exercising regularly, and since I needed to look presentable for business meetings, I consulted a makeup consultant and hairdresser for a complete makeover. Over the course of a few months, I began to truly consider myself well above average in terms of facial and figure attractiveness, which was often confirmed by the looks and comments from men when I was in public, even though I was never an attention seeker. Although my success made our lives much easier financially, including the ability to send our children to private school since the local public schools were inadequate and did not provide adequate child care, it had a negative impact on the relationship between Brian and I. I don't know exactly what the reason was. Perhaps Brian felt slighted by my success, since he had always been the main breadwinner in the family, perhaps because he believed that I paid too much attention to my appearance. I don't know what, but he began to create illusions that I had one or more affairs on the side. Total illusions, that's what it was. I have never cheated in my marriage, and I don't know where his accusations came from. It seemed that every time I had a business meeting with a man, whether in the city or the several times I met with business associates out of town, I was met with increasingly angry and fantastical accusations. Honestly, constant accusations, lack of any romantic aspect in marriage, and that's it. Less frequent and unsatisfactory sex made me question whether I even loved Brian. After the kids went to bed and Brian started whining and blaming again on the eve of my most important business trip since I came up with the crib concept, a trip that required me to go away for 2 nights and arranged for a very competent babysitter, I finally couldn't stand it. Why do you continue to accuse me of infidelity when I have never cheated on you? What reason or evidence can you have? I exclaimed. You're constantly dating guys, most of whom are better looking than me, was his surprised response, and you seem to pay a lot more attention to your appearance than when we got married. You do realize that most of my business contacts regarding cribs are men, right? I screamed even louder. And that appearance is important for business presentations. He looked at me silently with an uncomfortable expression on his face. You like that my business makes money, so how can I continue to make money if I stop doing business? I asked, this time trying to lower my voice. Well, you could license cribs like you did with baby carriers and just stay home with the kids. A woman's place is at home, not at work, where she's trying to compete with men. The only reason why, who are you doing this to, it seems to me, is to play tricks with them, he answered with a defiant tone and arms crossed over his chest. Fucking idiot, I spat. Either you're stuck in the 19th century or you're the most insecure person on earth. We make 10 times more money because I run the crib business than if I licensed them. He had nothing to say to this, just an arrogant look. Anyway, I'm not going to put up with your bullshit anymore. With these words, I went to our bedroom, finished packing my things for the trip to Chicago, called a taxi, and went to spend the night at the airport hotel so that in the morning I could just get out of bed and catch my flight. Where are you going? Brian shouted as I walked out of the house with my suitcase and laptop. I can't bear to see your stupid face anymore. I'll spend the night at the hotel. I'll call the kids tomorrow night at 6 like I planned, and I'll be back Thursday night around 8 like I planned. You can move my things to the guest room while I'm gone. I growled. He seemed to want to say, oh, wait. But the sound of a door slamming cut him off mid-sentence, and I was already in the taxi when he walked out into the street with a stunned expression on his face. My cell phone rang when I was halfway to the hotel. It was Brian. I turned it off. At night, I slept restlessly. I was so angry, disappointed in Brian, and upset about what my life looked like now that I realized there were a few things I needed to resolve before I could go home. How exactly I was going to do this with such a busy schedule of meetings with the supplier, the testing laboratory, a large existing client, and an even larger potential customer, I did not know. I finally got some sleep, but the 6:30 a.m. alarm woke me up physically tired and emotionally drained. My adrenaline kicked in during the flight, and by the time I got to my first meeting, I was pretty much up and running. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of business activity, including long dinners after the day's meetings or travel from one meeting place to another. The first night in Chicago, I called my kids before dinner. They were happy to talk to me, and I spent over half an hour on the phone listening to them about their days and upcoming events. When Brian answered the phone, he was abrupt. "Why didn't you answer my call or call me back?" he asked sharply. "Because I said everything I wanted, and nothing else would convince you of the absurdity of your ideas. If you don't want to apologize to me and renounce your accusations, I have nothing to tell you. I need to think about our future," she replied. Despite the severity of my words, I tried to soften my tone. "You're cheating on me, right?" he started, but I hung up. I didn't sleep much that night, thinking not only about what I should do with Brian, but also about the things that lay ahead. The second night in Chicago, I called the kids again and talked to them for half an hour. Brian didn't answer the phone, which suited me just fine. Moreover, I'm not sure that he was even at home, since the nanny answered the phone. After a business dinner that evening, I was completely exhausted, but not the least bit relaxed. I felt like I needed to warm up in the hotel jacuzzi. I wore a tiny two-piece swimsuit that I bought for myself as a gift when I got my body in order after having twins. I also put on my hotel robe and slippers and went downstairs. It was late enough that there was only one person in the pool and jacuzzi area, a man about my age. "I hope I won't disturb you if I exercise a little," I told him as I walked over to the jacuzzi. He looked at me with a sad expression on his face, smiled through his strength, and said, "No problem, please." I saw his eyes widen as I took off my robe and stepped into the water opposite him. "I hope I don't offend you," he said as I was neck-deep in water, "but you look as depressed as I do." I was a little surprised by this statement from a stranger. I was sure I looked depressed, so I replied, "I'm not offended at all. I'm embarrassed that my emotions are so obvious, and of course I can't know how you feel, but I can't help but agree with your assessment of my state." "Sorry," he replied with a guilty look. "I really shouldn't have said that." "Please don't apologize. I just feel sorry for you if you really feel the way I do." He smiled again through force. "I don't think you want to talk about it." He looked at me with confusion, but I continued to insist. "My name is Amy, by the way." "Are you a priest, Amy?" he laughed. I shook my head no and smiled. He leaned forward and extended his hand. "I'm Rob, Amy," he said. As we shook hands, he continued, "I haven't always been a lost soul. It's only recently." "Hey, maybe your situation is worse than mine, and I'll feel better by comparison," I joked, hoping to bring some lightness to the sinister conversation. "Well, let me ask you something first before I bare my soul to you. Where are you from, and how often do you come to Chicago?" "I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. I've never been to Chicago before, and I don't think I'll be back again, at least not in the near future. What about you?" "I'm from Dallas, and this is also my first and probably last visit to Chicago. I guess that means we're unlikely to ever meet again, right, Amy?" "I guess you're right, Rob. Does this make you want to talk about your problems?" Rob and I exchanged a few more words, after which he seemed ready to open up. I looked at him expectantly as he clearly thought about what he wanted to say. Finally, he began to speak, first timidly, and then increasingly accelerating the pace. "I've been married to Melinda for 5 years. We've been talking about having children, which is something we always wanted before we got married. She's been increasingly difficult to convince, and her behavior has made me worried and," he sighed, suspicious. In short, I found out that she was having an affair and did not force her lover to use a condom. "Damn it," I exclaimed. After a pause, I asked, "Did you expose her?" "Yeah, I also exposed the guy she slept with right before I left on this trip. I beat him to a pulp, and now I'm worried about whether the cops will be waiting for me when I get home." "More important than the cops, what did Melinda say when you exposed her?" "She lied about it. When I showed her the first photo, she continued to lie. After the second, she cursed me and lied further. After the third photo, in which everything was completely obvious, she said that I had no right to follow her. I told her that we were finished and left the apartment, spent the night in a hotel, and beat her lover right before leaving. This was 3 days ago." "Has she tried to contact you since then?" "She left me about 10 messages on my mobile phone. I listened to them all, but did not respond to any of them. In the first, she called me a child. In the second, she scolded me for beating her friend. In the third, she said that we need to talk. The last 7 messages were increasingly apologetic, including the fact that she left tonight begging for forgiveness, promising that it was all over, unable to explain why she did it, and sobbing hysterically," Rob responded. With every word, he became more and more depressed. Finally, he wiped away a tear. "Sorry, I shouldn't have burdened you with this," he continued once he had regained control of himself. "I don't know what to say," I muttered. "Do you want things to get better?" After a long pause, he bowed his head, wiped away another tear, and said, "I'm not sure. My main fear is that I'll never find someone who makes me feel as good as I did when we just got married. Perhaps there are more chances if you try to revive those feelings than to look for someone else. I don't know." After another long pause, Rob seemed to perk up and asked, "What about you? Is your husband cheating on you?" "Why do you think I'm married?" I answered with a smile. "I noticed the rings the same time I saw your slender body." I laughed. Rob blushed and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean for it to sound that way. So, is that your problem?" "No. My problem is that my husband is becoming more and more of a chauvinistic pig every day, and he keeps accusing me of cheating for no reason other than the fact that I work with men in business. When I was depressed after a miscarriage and needed help with 3 small children, he wasn't there, and I'm not sure I loved him." "Have you cheated?" he asked in awe. "Wow, how brave you are. We've only known each other for half an hour, and you're asking me such questions," I said, laughing. "Half an hour? We need to go out before we get cooked," he laughed in response. "No, absolutely not," I replied with a smile. "You don't want to go out?" Rob asked in surprise. "No, I've never cheated, but maybe I will soon," I laughed. With these words, we both left the jacuzzi. I noticed what a beautiful body Rob had. I also noticed that he noticed mine. We noticed a lot. It was probably a combination of factors, but mostly my fatigue from days of overwork and lack of sleep, combined with the heat of the jacuzzi, took its toll, and I suddenly felt very dizzy. Rob noticed notice again, and caught me before I fell. He sat me down on a sun lounger, threw a robe over my shoulders, and brought me a glass of water from the drinking fountain by the pool. I came to my senses after 3 or 4 minutes and thanked Rob. "Can you make sure I don't faint before I get to my room?" I asked. "He's 14-15. "No problem," Rob replied, putting on his robe and helping me up. We carried on light conversation as we walked the winding path to the elevator, then went up to the 14th floor. Rob stood on the other side of the elevator as we went up and chatted. When we got to my room, I looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you." At this moment, my body suddenly trembled involuntarily, especially in my lower abdomen, and this gave me courage. "Rob, would you like to come in?" He stared at me. "We're both in very difficult situations right now. Do you think my visit to your room will help at least one of them?" "I don't know if this will help your situation, but I'm sure yes, I know for sure that it will help mine. Please?" I continued, reaching out and touching his hand. In less than 2 minutes, we were both naked. I had vague memories of waking up several times during the night, But the only constant was the feeling of a warm, solid body next to me. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Rob's face. He was still sleeping, but his eyes were twitching. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt as I kissed him tenderly on the lips. Apparently not so gently, because he opened his eyes, smiled, and said, "What a nice way to wake up, beauty. I'm sorry I seduced you last night, sorry for you, but not for me. It was the best sexual experience of my life. Thank you." "Wait a second," he laughed. "A beautiful, sexy woman lets me worship her body and makes me so horny that for the first time in my life, I pass out after sex, and she thanks me. Is this real?" "Pinch me to check," I laughed. "Let's get back to reality for a while," I muttered. "What time is it?" Rob turned and looked at the clock by the bed. 8:22, he laughed. "I had to get up at 7:30. I need to call and reschedule the 9:30 to 10:30 appointment. Hopefully we can do it again if I do," I said, biting my finger. "Make your call and I'll make mine," he laughed. I got up, made 2 calls, went to the toilet and washed my face. Then I returned to the bedroom. Rob had just finished talking on his cell phone. He pinched my butt as he ran past me to the bathroom. I was standing drinking water from a bottle when Rob came back from the toilet with a devilish look on his face. He immediately hugged me and kissed me passionately on the lips. I was incredibly horny very quickly. We had sex again. When we separated, we just painted for a while. When we regained our composure, we smiled, giggled, and caressed each other, chatting easily. When 9:15 arrived, we knew it was time to move as there was no way we could delay the appointment any longer. We showered together, playing and caressing each other, but we didn't have sex. After Rob got dressed, he went to his room to pack his things, and I frantically applied makeup and packed my suitcase myself, while still managing to eat 2 energy bars. We agreed to meet in the lobby to check out and take a taxi together since his meeting was only half a mile from mine. As the taxi pulled up to the building where I had my meeting, Rob kissed me on the lips and asked, "What time do you have to leave for the airport today?" "About 3:30, I replied, squeezing his hand. "Why?" "That's about the same time as me. Let's just say, be in front of this building at 3:30, and I'll pick you up in a taxi so we can go to the airport together." "Sounds great," I replied, giving him a quick kiss, grabbing my bag and laptop from the trunk and waving as I walked into the building. I was on such a natural high, having slept better than I had in a year and had 2 of the best sexual experiences of my life, that I pulled off my presentation with flying colors. I was able to charm a potential client. As a result, I received the largest order for my products, and even with a bonus. I also had them sign a non-disclosure agreement and discussed with them a few of my other ideas that interested them. I turned down several offers to take me to the airport. I finished at 2:30 and made good use of the time until 3:20 when I went outside to wait for Rob. I had some inspiration about how I was going to solve my problem with Brian. After the night with Rob, I knew I could never be happily married to Brian again, but I also couldn't be so cruel as to try to take his children away from him, because they were the meaning of his life, and despite my problems with him, he was a good man. Besides, I couldn't allow my children to grow up without both parents. Rob's taxi pulled up at exactly 3:30. He came out, put my bag and laptop in the trunk, and hugged me tightly. We exchanged information about how our meetings went. His meeting was almost as successful as mine, so we were both pleased. "So, have you decided what you're going to do with Brian?" he asked. "Yes. I had the same brilliant idea as when I came up with the baby carrier and crib," I replied with a big smile. "She's brilliant, solves all my problems and answers all my concerns, and I think I can get Brian to agree to it. After my night with Rob, I know I'll never settle for anything less than fantastic sex all the time again. The rest of my life." After that, I kissed him passionately. "And you?" I asked him. "You did for me what I did for you. You brightened my future." He laughed. He then kissed me quickly and continued, "I will begin divorce proceedings from Melinda as soon as I get home. My main fear, whether I could find someone who turns me on as much as she does, disappeared almost the moment I met you. Thank you, sexy goddess. This was followed by another passionate kiss. Our flights departed from different terminals at O'Hare Airport, so we said goodbye with another passionate kiss. He handed me a piece of paper with an email address. In case you ever want to chat, he smiled. I went to check in for my flight with a big smile on my face and wet panties, having never learned Rob's last name or told him mine. I returned home at 8 p.m. as planned. I was greeted with delight by the children, but Brian's greeting was rather cold. I talked and played with the kids before they went to bed, then read Jamie and Brittany a bedtime story. Tom thought he was too old for that. When I went downstairs about to tell Brian, "We need to talk," he beat me to it. "We need to talk, Amy," he said calmly. "Yes, Brian, we need it," I replied with a smile. We sat in the living room and closed the door so the children couldn't overhear us. When we sat down, he started right off the bat. "I decided that the only way to get you to stop your affairs was to make you feel the pain that I feel. So I slept with one of your friends until you were gone." "It was," he said, crossing his arms. I didn't expect such a statement, but he expected my reaction even less. "Well done, Brian," I said without any irony. "That makes what I'm about to tell you a lot easier. We're getting a divorce." "What?" he squeezed out. "I'm sick and tired of your baseless accusations. I have never cheated on you with anyone else in our entire marriage, except for this trip. You finally brought me to this point with your absurd attacks on my character, which destroyed my love for you. There's no turning back now." "What?" was his bewildered answer. "There are several options. Listen to me carefully. Are you listening?" Yeah," he replied, almost like an automaton. "The first option is that we can go through a normal divorce full of arguments. We will spend a lot of money, ruin our relationship forever, make the children unhappy and fight for custody, and one of us, most likely, you will lose the right to be with the children on a full-time basis and will only be able to see them occasionally. I don't like this option." Now he listened carefully. He looked at me intently. "The second option is that we can get a divorce, maintaining full agreement and mutual understanding. We can buy a duplex, tear down the wall between the apartments. Your bedroom will be in one wing and mine in the other. We will divide our property rationally and agree to share all future expenses for the house and raising the children equally. We will be able to continue to live with the children as we do now, so that we will both remain full-time parents to them. The only difference will be that we will no longer sleep together, and everyone will be able to have sex with anyone." He still looked at me intently, but was silent. "The third option is the same as the second, but we will not tell anyone that we are divorced. We will continue to wear rings and pretend to our families that we are still together. The third option is what I want, but I'll agree to the second one. I hope you don't choose the first one, because if you do, we'll both regret it." "But Amy, I don't want a divorce. I just want you to stop seeing other men. I will never be able to convince you that before this trip I never cheated, and you are too proud to go to a psychologist to deal with the serious problem that you have. And also, I just don't love you anymore. I like you except for your brainless accusations, and you're a good father, but I have no interest in sex with you." The conversation did not develop as he expected. He sat depressed, his head in his hands. "On Monday, I will meet with the divorce lawyer I found upon returning from my trip. I am giving you until Tuesday evening to decide which option you will choose. If you do not decide by then, or do not convince me that you really want I need more time to think about it, I'll assume you choose the first option and start the separation process right away. In the meantime, I'll sleep in the guest bedroom." With that, I got up, went to the other bathroom, took a shower, and went to bed in the guest room. There was no sign that Brian had gone upstairs. The next day, Friday, Brian was sullen at breakfast. Due to the morning excitement before school, I think the children did not notice. As usual, Brian left for work before I dropped the kids off at school and gave each of them an unusually long hug. He said goodbye to me, but we didn't kiss or hug. When I got home from dropping the kids off at school, the first thing I did was send the manufacturer orders and supplier rebates I had received on my trip to Chicago. I spoke with the production manager and told him exactly how I wanted things prioritized and got his promise that he would provide all reasonable assistance to the testing lab. Then, in case Brian chose the second or third option, I went looking for a duplex. Susan, a leading real estate agent in the city, did not know of any listings on the market that would fully meet my requirements. However, she said that a local high-quality builder she knew and trusted named Jack had just finished a large project and was about to start building a show home on a highly desirable site he owned. She called him, and we met with him that same Friday morning. When I presented my ideas to Jack, he was intrigued. He showed me the plans for a show home he was going to build. Both Susan, Jack, and I, plus Jack's construction manager, thought we could revise his plans to suit my needs with relative ease. I planned to build a solar home, using passive solar heating, a solar water heater, and photovoltaic panels. I hope to provide 80% of the home's energy needs from solar energy, Jack said. It suits me, I smiled. I wrote him a check for $1,000 to rework the plans, and he promised they would be ready by next Friday. Brian and I spent Friday night and the entire weekend taking care of the kids. After the kids went to bed, we didn't talk much until Sunday evening, but we remained nice to each other. On Sunday evening, Brian wanted to discuss our situation. "Amy, is there any way we can do without a divorce?" He began the conversation weakly. "Why do you need this, Brian? You don't trust me, you're unhappy with me being successful in business, and for a long time you didn't let me know that you really loved me. What exactly do you want to keep?" I still love you, Amy. I can't handle how I feel, even if you think I'm crazy, but I'll really try to believe you and won't try to make you give up your business anymore." He groaned, on the verge of tears. As gently as I could, I said, "I'm sorry, Brian. It's too late. You destroyed my love, and it won't come back, and I'm not going to be chased at 30 years old, and I'm not going to confirm your accusations." The conversation did not develop as he expected. He sat depressed, his head in his hands. "On Monday, I will meet with the divorce lawyer I found upon returning from my trip. I am giving you until Tuesday evening to decide which option you will choose. If you do not decide by then, or do not convince me that you really want I need more time to think about it, I'll assume you choose the first option and start the separation process right away. In the meantime, I'll sleep in the guest bedroom." On Monday, I met with a divorce lawyer named Melanie. She told me that what I wanted was unique to her practice, but she was interested in it and had no problem being a bulldog if necessary, or being creative if a second or third option turned out to be possible. However, Melanie needed to know which option to prefer before she could realistically prepare the paperwork, as things would differ significantly depending on the choice. As Brian left for work on Tuesday morning, I told him, "I need your answer about which option you choose by this evening, Brian. Please make it the second or third option." He simply nodded and left. After the kids went to bed Tuesday night, we went into the living room together. I've accepted the reality of our situation. I'm sad, but I've accepted it. The third option is what I want, at least initially. We'll probably tell people about our divorce in a year or two, he said with tears in my eyes. "Thank you, Brian," I said, hugging him. "On Friday evening, I will show you the plans for the house I am offering." I strangely didn't feel an ounce of grief, sadness, guilt, or any other emotion other than relief and happiness. On Wednesday, I called Melanie and told her the good news. She promised to have the paperwork ready by Friday and said that if Brian could take time off from work, we should come to her on Friday afternoon to discuss the paperwork and make sure we were both happy with it. On Friday morning, I received the finalized plans for the house from Jack. They were perfect, and I was pleased that he was excited about the construction. Jack told me what he needed from me to get a construction loan. In the afternoon, Brian and I went to see Melanie. She was very straightforward in her approach and revised her proposal on the details of the divorce to take into account what Brian and I needed, then wanted and hoped for. I tried my best to be compliant, and it was clear that Brian was trying too. I conceded on two issues that I would have liked to avoid, but everything else was perfectly in line with our desires. Melanie tried her best to make sure our divorce went smoothly. Although she couldn't make everything completely confidential, she managed to keep most of it confidential, and she filed in a remote county in North Carolina so that almost no one we knew would be able to find documents that were not subject to confidentiality. Between our assets, Brian's salary, and the net worth of my business, we had no problem getting financing for a new home. Jack, a trim, good-looking guy in his mid-30s, was a real pleasure to work with. It was obvious that he was excited to build our home because the project was unique and included all the energy efficiency ideas he had wanted to implement since he got into the construction business. However, one thing we were unable to get from him was an exact completion date, which was important so that we could sell our home smoothly and move into a new one. Jack was easy to talk to, so easy that I even felt comfortable telling him why I wanted a house with 2 bedrooms, 2 garages on opposite sides, and 2 side entrances to the bedrooms and garages in addition to the main entrance. About 6 weeks into construction, Jack came to my house on a Wednesday morning while the kids were at school and Brian was at work. We discussed the details of the house, and I again teased him for not wanting to give an exact completion date. To be honest, I was probably flirting with him. Since spending the night and morning with Rob, my libido had skyrocketed, and I was wildly horny as it was the last time I had sex, and it had been 9 weeks. During our discussion, Jack told me that his wife was pregnant. "Is this your first child, Jack?" "Yes, but perhaps the last one, because things are not going very smoothly," he replied. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said worriedly. "What's the problem?" "My wife, Teresa, is having a hard time with her pregnancy. She's now finishing her second trimester, and the doctor has prescribed bed rest for her. Luckily, her parents live nearby and are retired and happy to help her, so we didn't have to hire anyone. I guess I shouldn't complain, especially to a client," he laughed, "but it's really hard for me to go without adult interaction." "You mean without sex?" I laughed. He blushed. When I continued to laugh, he relaxed and said, "Yes, no sex." I replied, "Yes, tell that to me, soon to be divorced," and we both laughed. As he collected his papers and was about to leave, his face suddenly changed. "Listen, Amy," he began. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "I want to ask you something, but I want you to pretend I never said it if you don't like what I ask. Can you promise that?" My curiosity increased. I paused to consider his offer and said, "Of course. Although you are my contractor, I also consider you a friend, and friends can forget if necessary." "Thank you," he sighed. After another pause, he said, "You want a guaranteed completion date, and I want to get through my wife's pregnancy without resorting to sex girls. I know you're a very practical woman, judging by the way you handle your divorce. Well, is there any way we can make sure we both get what we want?" In my growing arousal, I certainly fantasized about sex with Jack, but I didn't pursue it seriously because I didn't want to complicate the situation. For a long time, I looked at him sternly, crossing my arms. When he started to blush and said, "Okay, forget it," I interrupted him. "Yes, Jack, I think we can work something out. How about you give me a guaranteed completion date in 4 months, and we'll meet every Wednesday at noon to discuss status." He smiled widely. "How about I give you a guaranteed date in 90 days, and we meet for discussion over lunch every Tuesday and Friday?" "Sounds like a plan," I replied with a big smile. I walked up to him, hugged him, and ran my hand down his tight pants, then said, "Bring me a contract on Friday with a guaranteed date, and we will have our first meeting at noon." "Sounds like a plan," he repeated with a shy smile, then gathered his things and said, "See you Friday," over his shoulder as he walked out the door. It's funny, but I didn't think for a second about turning down the deal with Jack. When he arrived punctually on Friday, clearly fresh from his shower, I greeted him in a robe and high heels. This made his eyes huge. I read the revised contract, signed the two originals, he signed them too. I put one of them in the safe in my office, then threw off my robe, heading towards him completely naked. He was speechless when I walked up to him, ran my hand over his chest and whispered, "I have something in my bedroom that I want to show you." Then I took his hand and led him upstairs, deliberately emphasizing the sway of my hips when I was walking. Jack was clearly nervous when I led him into the bedroom, which was the guest room. I slowly began to undress him, without waiting for his help. When his shirt was off and his pants and boxers were around his ankles, I said, "This is going to be sex for fun, Jack. We're going to satisfy each other in a purely animal sense. Take off your pants and let's get started." While it wasn't as good as with Rob, the sex was much better than average with Brian. We were both pleased. We took a shower together, playing and caressing each other. As he was about to leave, he started to say, "Sorry, I was so excited." But I interrupted him. "After the third or fourth time, we'll be experts at pleasing each other," I said with a smile and a kiss. "See you Tuesday." He had a satisfied smile on his face as he walked out. My prediction turned out to be correct. By the third time, our sex was amazing. Not the same as with Rob, but very satisfying. Every Tuesday and Friday at noon, we discussed building a house for about 15 minutes, and then passionately had sex for about 45 minutes or an hour. Jack's wife, Teresa, gave birth to a healthy baby boy 2 weeks early. As a gift, I gave them one of my baby carriers, one of my best cribs, and several other baby products that my company started producing. Jack completed construction of the house and received permission to operate it 2 days before the promised date. After Brian, Tom, the girls, and I walked through the new house with Jack and his foreman, our list of issues was surprisingly short, only one major and two minor problems. The foreman promised to fix them the next day. As we were about to leave, I pulled Jack aside and said, "You've really outdone yourself, Jack. I'm thrilled with how the house turned out. It's exactly what I wanted." "I'm delighted with you too," he replied. "You know, Amy, I understand that our agreement is completed, but I was wondering if it is possible to get a bonus for a job well done. Teresa is still not in a position to help." I grinned. "You know what? We're moving this weekend, and I'm sure you'll want to stop by every day for the next week at noon to make sure everything is in order. Come through the east entrance. This will be my bedroom." His smile was even wider than mine. The house was perfect. By the time we moved, the divorce was finalized, and, as far as I know, no one except Jack, who remained silent, knew about it. The children suspected absolutely nothing and were happy and well adjusted to their new life. Brian and I maintained a civil, even friendly relationship, and we now had separate financial arrangements and obligations. We shared all expenses for the house and children equally, and we also divided everything else. We exchanged gifts on birthdays and holidays, although we did not celebrate anniversaries. After the bonus week with Jack, we parted ways, both happy with what we had done. I knew that Jack wanted to continue our meetings, but I pretended not to notice and gently but firmly made it clear that this was no longer possible. I didn't want to ruin his marriage to Teresa, and now there was no reason for him to come to my house again. Sex with Jack kept my libido high after meeting Rob, and I knew I needed someone else to satisfy my needs, especially now that I was in the perfect situation for this, a divorce and my own wing of the house. I was somewhat surprised by how many men, married and unmarried, wanted to meet me, despite the fact that the whole world still considered me married. I had a few fleeting connections, but none of them gave me what I was looking for, until one day I came across a piece of paper with Rob's email. "I need to see how he's doing," I said to myself, feeling a little excitement in the pit of my stomach as I glanced at the address. I sent him a simple message. "Hi, Rob. I've been busy. My divorce is finalized. I live in a new house with a duplex where my ex-husband and I live in separate parts, and the kids don't suspect a thing. How are you doing? Are you not in jail? Best regards, best wishes, Amy from Chicago." The answer came within 5 minutes. "Hey, sexy. I've almost given up hope that you'll ever write to me, Amy. My divorce was finalized last week. I wasn't prosecuted. Melinda's friend didn't want publicity, and it turns out he was married too. The divorce process was difficult for several months, but in the end, everything was resolved. Unfortunately, I did not find someone who could replace Melinda. Do you want to meet with love and passion? That's right, I laughed. He really was special, I thought. What bad could happen? This was 2 years ago. A lot has changed since then. Now everyone knows that Brian and I are divorced because I'm married to Rob and Brian got married again. Rob and I dated for 3 days in Dallas and 3 days in Raleigh before he decided to take a job in North Carolina. My kids instantly fell in love with Rob, and he and Brian get along better than one might expect, perhaps in part because I get along so well with Brian's new wife. Rob found a job in Durham, just 9 miles from my home, that was as good as the one he had in Texas. We spent a month filled with love and sex in my house before we got married, and this has been going on for 18 months. When I said, "I do," to Rob at age 31, I knew exactly what every word of my wedding vows meant, and I am confident that I will not only keep them, but treasure them. Brian met Coretta, a woman who had a history of abuse and had a daughter the same age as our twins. She lived in poverty most of her life. Brian convinced her to get a divorce, paid her legal fees, talked a prosecutor into taking her ex-husband's case, and then married her. She loves being a stay-at-home mom, which fits Brian's dream perfectly, and she is an amazing mother. Not only do my kids get along with her daughter, but they have really come to love Coretta. Unbeknownst to the kids or Brian, I pay Coretta for childcare when I need to go away so she can have some money for herself, something she never had. Coretta is almost as happy as Rob is with me that I'm 3 months pregnant with Rob, and she promised to help with the baby as much as she can. Jack is already building an extension on our half of the house for a nursery and playroom, and Brian has even offered to help with financing. Of course, Jack and I don't have a contract with a guaranteed completion date, to his disappointment, because once Rob came along, I didn't want anyone else and didn't even have the slightest interest in it. Rob says the annex should have our mascot a hot tub. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.